Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Little Acts of Kindness. This will be Part 87, Chapter 87, entitled Kidnapping and Unease. At the same time that the prisoners were being released, two boys were making their way into a well-decorated building. Dressed in plain, boring clothes, the civilian robots took no notice of them. They acted like they belonged, and they weren't questioned. Even Minoru, with his short stature and fairly obvious quirk, but he supposed that it could just be the robots were programmed to not react if they were acting like they were normal civilians. Minoru was with Sero, and they were currently working on Midoriya's plan to kidnap the mayor, where they would have to hold him hostage for at least 12 hours. Everything was going smoothly. He didn't trust it. Minoru was just waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the heroes to come out from nowhere to stop him and Sero. Especially if it was Bakugo or Todoroki. He didn't want to be a smear of purple on the wall. "Calm down," Sero hissed at him. "Sorry," Minoru apologized, doing his best to stop his fidgeting and his wandering thoughts. Minoru knew that he should trust Midoriya's plans. After all, his plans had worked so far almost perfectly. Midoriya was scary. The boy had always been strong, but never before had he really appeared strong. Yet the boy had always been kind. It was that reason that Minoru had approached Midoriya when he saw the boy after his detention that day. He had seen Midoriya tense up, wariness in his eyes, but the boy still stopped. He still waited for Minoru to come up to him. Midoriya had given him a confused look, and it had only been then that Minoru remembered that Midoriya was refusing to speak because he had copied voice. Minoru also remembered, sitting in the classroom as some of the others practiced sign language with Midoriya. Minoru hadn't bothered, hadn't seen the point of learning something that they wouldn't need to use once Midoriya learned to control the quirk. He regretted his decision now. It had been stupid. Even if he wouldn't need it to speak with Midoriya, it was still something that he would have had to learn eventually. Anyways, Minoru hadn't known sign language, but he got the gist of what Midoriya had been asking. "Oh, you're wondering why I'm here." The other boy gave a nod, and so Minoru explained, and then he got to the crux of the matter, the fact that Midnight Sensei had made him think about his actions, to realize why people reacted the way they did to his actions. He asked Midoriya to tell him what he thought. He knew the boy was kind, but he also believed that Midoriya would tell him the truth. And Midoriya had. He hadn't held back, telling him that his behavior unnerved Midoriya, that he treated the girls like possessions, and he had given him advice, telling him to talk with Kaminari. Minoru had promised he would, and then Midoriya made another note. "Just learn from your mistakes, Mineta, and I'm sure you'll be a good hero one day." And Minoru realized that Midoriya believed he could be better, that he wasn't a lost cause. It had meant a lot to Minoru, and he vowed to become a hero his classmates could be proud of. He had done a lot of reflection, and had a lot of help from Mount Lady understanding acceptable and non-acceptable behavior. Then he came back. He had given his apology to the girls, and they had decided to give him another chance, to let him stay in the class. But he knew he was on thin ice. If he slipped up, he had no doubts that Aizawa-sensei would kick him out of the class. "You ready?" Sero questioned, as they arrived outside the door to the mayor's office. He nodded, and pulled off some of his balls, being careful not to let them touch his clothes. This wasn't his hero costume, after all, which had been made to not stick to his quirk. Sero pulled out some of his tape, and then they entered the room. The mayor looked up, but by then it was too late. Sero had wrapped his tape around the man's mouth, silencing him, and Minoru had used his balls to stick the man's limbs together. The two got to work, thoroughly binding the robot that represented the mayor. With that done, they made a harness for Sero out of his tape and Minoru's balls and slung the mayor onto Sero's back. Then they opened the window, and Sero swung free, taking off to get some distance. He did not immediately follow. Instead, he pulled out his can of green spray paint, and 3 presses of the nozzle later, there was a green smile decorating the office, making a statement of exactly who kidnapped the mayor. Minoru used his balls to scale down the building, heading in a different direction. "Team kidnappers to control. The package is on the way," Minoru reported to Rin. "Understood. The distraction team will start momentarily." As Minoru made his way through the city, taking the long route back to the base, he noticed a few green smiles decorating the walls. Looks like Ashido had been busy. Minoru made it back to the base, finding that Sero had checked in and the mayor was hidden in the sewer system. Sero would be staying nearby to act as the warden. Midoriya gave him a smile. Good work. Feel free to rest up. Minoru gave a thumbs up and went to eat some of the food that Ashido had stolen. Suyu, who preferred going by Su, was patrolling the streets of the simulated city, doing her best to reassure the civilians that everything was okay, despite the increase in criminal activity. Midoriya and the others had yet to do anything major, it seemed. Most of the attacks they heard of were minor, mostly some property damage or a store being robbed. Then there was Monoma, Bondo, Kodai, and Koda, who didn't seem to be doing anything but distracting them. They would grab heroes' attention, lead them on a chase, and then get away, so they were some sort of distraction team, but they still couldn't ignore them. If they were ignored, then there might be a secondary plan of action for them. The only major things the villains had pulled off to her knowledge was killing Momo and attacking the Hero Commission. Su tapped her chin. Surely the villains had to be up to something, but what? Then the news about the prisoners escaping came out, and Todoroki and Hananuki were on the case, the patrolling hero students helping to capture any of the escapees they came across. In all the chaos, it took a couple hours before they learned that the mayor had been kidnapped. She had been dispatched to investigate, see if they could figure out where the villains had taken him. She arrived on scene and immediately saw the same green smile that had appeared on the video. She did her best to ignore it, looking around, but she saw nothing else in the room that could give her a clue. A breeze caused her to look out the window. It was open. Had this been how they entered and left the building? Looking down, she saw some purple balls sticking to the wall. Mineta. She frowned and made her way to the ground, looking around. It took a few minutes of searching that she found some more purple balls, these ones along a wall, so she followed them up. Su managed to follow the trail for a bit before it just stopped. At the end of where she lost the trail was another green smiley face, taunting her. Perhaps, had it been someone else, they would have gotten frustrated, but Su realized that the trail had been left on purpose. It was trying to lead her away, to annoy her into not finding the real trail. So she went back to the office and started to look again. It took her a bit, but eventually she found a small piece of Sero's tape attached to the street light. She kept looking around and managed to find another couple tracks, but all too soon she lost the trail. It vanished, and she couldn't find any hint to where they were. She returned to the Hero Agency, informing Hitoshi, who gave her a nod, thanking her for the information. With that, she went to rest. This exercise was certainly interesting, and it was always surprising just how much funding UA had, to have entire fake cities made for them to use during their training. The robots that acted as civilians couldn't be too cheap either, especially as they were giving decent impressions of actual civilians, even if their voices could use some work. Currently, they were still wandering around, though their paces were hurried and they kept looking around. They weren't cowering away yet, but Su couldn't help but feel as if that would change soon. It wasn't a thought many of her teammates seemed to share. Throughout the day, she noticed them slowly relaxing as there were no big moves made, at least none they were aware of, which worried her. She was sure that they were up to something, but whatever it was, they kept hidden. She suspected that Midoriya wanted them to relax, that he and the other villains were preparing something, but she had no idea what it could be. While her team was relaxing about the activities of the villains, things were tense around the agency as some people glared at Bakugo and Jiro. Bakugo she could understand. He was rude and didn't seem like very good hero material. He had hated Midoriya when they first started class, but he had mellowed out over time. He and Midoriya stayed far away from each other, but she noticed that Midoriya still tensed a bit when Bakugo strayed too close. She could understand Bakugo, but Jiro was a bit harder for her to really see as a bully, at least a bully on purpose. Her comments to Kaminari had been a bit mean, but it wasn't like she said the comments to be mean, or at least Su didn't think so. But maybe Jiro had. Su frowned, displeased that Midoriya's words were getting to her. She knew he was just playing his role as a villain, playing it well, in fact. But still, he shouldn't have said that about Jiro. If Kaminari had an issue with Jiro's comments, then why didn't he just say something? If more people spoke what was on their mind, then there wouldn't be so many problems with the world. That's why Su liked speaking her mind. She made sure others were aware of her thoughts, so they didn't misunderstand her, or believe she had some other goal in mind when she spoke. She glanced at the clock, and seeing it was nearing 8, she got up to start getting ready. Sue gathered up her gear, giving nods to the other heroes who were currently resting as she started to make her way out of the building. But as she passed by the cells where they were keeping Hagakure, she heard humming. It was really slow and creepy. Sue glanced at the cell, seeing the clothes that they had Hagakure put on sitting on the little cot. "Why are you humming, Karo?" Sue asked. There was no response. Hagakure just kept humming. Sue frowned, her unease increasing, but there was nothing she could do. Passing by Hitoshi as she came in from her own patrol, Sue said, "I think Hagakure is up to something, Karo." Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. "What do you think she's up to?" "I don't know," Sue admitted. Hitoshi gave a nod. "Don't worry, I'll set someone to keep an eye on her." Sue gave a relieved sigh. "Thank you, Karo." Feeling a bit better, she exited the agency and began her next patrol. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 87 of Little Acts of Kindness. Chapter 88 will be up next. Let me know what you all thought about this chapter. I really like the fact that this fic actually does have Minetta's redemption in it, and the fact that the author doesn't just let that happen and not bring it up again. So we get to kind of rehash the fact that Minetta has changed in this one. And I kind of appreciate that. I'm a huge fan of Minetta bashing fics, or fics where Minetta just is expelled or didn't exist in the first place and Hitoshi's been in Class A the whole time. I'm a big fan of those too, but I also like the fact that this fic stood out in that they tried to reform Minetta and actually make him change. So let me know what you all thought about this one, Sue's inclusion and perspective into some of this as well, and some of the progression of what the villain team has been up to. As always, thank you all so much for listening.